The siren began as a thin whistle along the ceiling of Building 1 and thickened into a steady wail that cut through the clatter of sealing machines. It was a little after 4 on May 10th, 1993. Women at the packing tables counted plastic parts into bags, slid them into boxes, and tried to keep pace with the foreman's nod. Something burned. A sweet, chemical note slipped under the smell of hot glue. A runner from maintenance yelled for an extinguisher. The alarm kept sounding, but most people waited for orders. Drills had taught them to stand by until a supervisor waved them out. Behind a row of pallets stacked near a wall outlet, flame took hold so fast it looked like a trick. Cardboard winked to black, then roared. A woman grabbed an extinguisher, yanked the handle, and got a dying cough of powder. Another hammered the wall alarm with the heel of her hand. Smoke turned heavy and dark, plastic and resin, and rolled for the stairwell like water finding a drain. When the door opened, the stair turned into a chimney. Kader Industrial's toy complex in Sam Fran district stood as 4 long, boxy buildings run hard to fill export orders. Sprinklers were missing or dry. Windows at lower levels were barred. Some exit doors were chained to stop theft. Everyone knew it and worked around it because the job was the job, and rent came due whether a door opened or not. The safety poster showed clean arrows and green running men. On the floor, there were stacked cartons where the arrows said space should be. On the second floor of Building 1, the foreman finally shouted to move. Workers pressed for the north stairs and backed off coughing. A guard waved them to the south. That door rattled against a chain. Someone threw a shoulder. The chain held. Heat climbed like a weight on the chest. Ceiling tiles drooped. Paint ran. A woman slammed her fist against a barred window until skin split. Another smashed glass higher up where louvers had been left for ventilation, then swung her legs through and dropped. She hit hard, cried out, and crawled because the air near the ground hurt less. Across the yard, men in Building 2 watched fire climb the outside of 1, quick as a thrown cloth catching a line. The power flickered. A freight elevator lurched and died. Supervisors shouted different routes. Some workers found the loading dock, but cartons blocked the roll-up door, and the manual crank was missing. Bubble-wrapped toys stacked for shipment shrank into themselves and flared like slow fuses. Now there were 2 fires, then 3, which meant 1 fire moving wherever it pleased. The first engine nosed in and found a dry hydrant. A firefighter beat the cap with a wrench and swore. Another engine tried a standpipe and got a thin thread of water that looked hopeful until a hose kinked and the thread vanished. Kader's extinguishers were spent or gone. The wind shifted and pinned heat under the eaves of Building 1 until smoke went orange. On the second and third floors, people used their bodies as rams, knocked out more glass, and jumped. Some found ladders brought by neighborhood crews. Others trusted their legs and paid for it. The first collapse arrived with a crack deep enough to be felt through the yard. The roof of Building 1 dropped into the top floor. Steel softened, columns snapped, a wall folded and fell into dust. When the cloud lifted, a section of the building was gone, replaced by a mound of concrete and twisted bar that pulsed heat. From inside came calls, and then tapping, then nothing. Family members reached the fence and called names. Daycare workers hurried children through a side gate and kept them from turning around. Ambulances shuttled between the yard and hospitals where nurses cut clothing from burned skin and taped names to wrists when patients could speak. A woman with soot in her mouth apologized for leaving her sister behind until oxygen slowed the words. In the yard, a manager read a clipboard and lost his place because his hands shook. He tried again and realized half his team had stayed late for quota and weren't on the sheet. Building 2 held longer, its concrete ribs flexing while metal roofing buckled like tin under a fist. At the loading dock, the roll-up finally cleared, and a crush of workers ran into air so hot it pushed them sideways. A truck cab glowed like a stove. The tires of a trailer slumped and stuck to asphalt that had softened under pooled plastic. Firefighters found one hydrant that would give water and played a stream over the shells of 1 and 2. The spray turned to steam before it touched anything that mattered. There was a rumor of hope near a split stair where a crew heard a voice and crowbarred at a slab. The slab shifted. Flame beat back through the gap. Their boots began to soften on the soles. They pulled out and went to easier rescues. A worker wedged behind a radiator, another reachable by a ladder through a busted louver. A man dragged across shards to a patch of shade near the fence where he lay, shaking, and would not take water because his mouth felt like paper. Building 3 sagged and went in sections, a shrug more than a single drop, turning floors into ramps that fed fire. The sky browned. Sirens layered until they turned into one sound. Police taped off a lane, lifted the tape for groups with the same blank searching look, and kept count the best they could. Shoes lay in singles and scattered pairs. A clock in an office had melted into a shape that told no time. The whiteboard on the side of a truck filled with numbers that did not settle. By evening, the fire shrank to stubborn red seams and breathy flares whenever crews pulled on a piece of roof. Exhausted firefighters sat on hoses and stared at their gloves. Medics picked glass from palms and bandaged heel cuts from jumps that had saved lives at the cost of bone. A monk stepped through with a bowl and left it by the gate. The smell was a mix of plastic, wet ash, and something like a hot electrical room multiplied to the size of a block. The counting took days because rosters bent under overtime and last-minute swaps. The number set at 188 dead and more than 500 injured. The names ran young. The photos in the papers were the kind taken for job applications, faces squared to the lens, shoulders straight, eyes doing their best to be formal. Families gathered at the fence with incense and pictures taped to cardboard. The Prime Minister promised an inquiry. Inspectors photographed the charred hinge of a chain door, sketched floor plans, and noted where sprinklers should have been. A reporter said the comparison to the Triangle Shirtwaist fire was obvious and this time too late. Executives offered statements through lawyers. Policies existed, they said. Training had been provided. Any locked door was an error by local staff. The owners were far from the smoke. Compensation began to trickle. Envelopes, vouchers, checks that needed 3 offices to clear. A father fixed a misspelling to release a stipend. A sister rode a bus with a stack of forms to prove the dead had sent money home each month. Unions and advocates marched with signs that named the missing and asked the simplest question a workplace can face. Why couldn't they get out? Regulators drafted new rules, alarms to central panels, wet pipe systems that had to be charged and tested, unannounced inspections, doors that had to stay openable from the inside. Some factories complied. Others complied when visits were expected and drifted after. Shifts still started at dawn. Pallets still crowded halls because orders did not stop coming. Plastic still burned fast. The ruins stayed long enough to weather. Kids slowed their bicycles to stare through the fence. Older workers told them what had happened there and how the ground could still smell like it if you kicked the dirt. Survivors learned what anniversaries do. They circle whether you want them to or not. A woman with a heel scar lit incense each May and stood still while the smoke rose. She told her son, when he was old enough, that doors matter more than promises. Years blur the edge between news and history, but the facts remain steady in plain speech. An electrical fault met stacked fuel. Doors meant for escape were chained. Windows that could have given people a way out were barred. The first engine found dry water. The building that should have been a place to work became a trap. The number 188 does not move. It sits in records and in the mouths of people who keep it close so it won't erode. There is a last image that stays with those who were there. Not the big collapses, but a small moment in the yard after dark when the sirens had thinned. The hoses lay slack. and a security guard unhooked a chain from a door that no longer led anywhere. He set it down carefully, as if quiet hands could make up for what had been done with it earlier. No one spoke to him. No one had to. The chain answered the question the day had asked. Thank you for listening to Road to Ruins. Subscribe for more true stories where systems fail and people pay the price.